That's sure.
Where is it?
I'm sure. That's that's I can send to your WhatsApp.
You have it fast, right?
I have it on my WhatsApp.
Maybe I will ask you 5 right. I will get 45 right.
But it's on my phone, right?
Yes.
Also, my
Yeah, you have the phone.
okay. It's fine. And then you forward the mom. Tell me, mom. Yeah. Right, so you can yes. And that's okay. Okay, which one? So five years. Ah, okay.
So, where is it? Right.
The video, not a just show you site of video of mine.
Wait on your WhatsApp.
So my WhatsApp,
Yeah. But I'll check it out.
Disconnected. Please disconnect and proceed. Please disconnect.
Yeah.
Please disconnected. Nice and proceed.
A moment. WhatsApp video. So all the videos on your WhatsApp. So yes.
Does it have dates on it? Because I
What is it?
sent it to someone today. Does it have date on it?
Let's see how it looks on your phone.
Yes. Okay. Just listen to this. And then
And
then
this.
this one.
All right. Yeah, it starts at 9:50.
15.
So social is good. You said this right.
Morning.
Morning. In person, since 11 p.m. That's you. I'll just take notes of that. If you have any slides, I just present.
Father is supposed to be.
It's supposed to be your number because this is your sent is on WhatsApp. Just one of this. Just one of this. Let me look at it. Can you open the door? I will, I will. I have to take pictures for you. Yeah, so now once you have to like now it's on our WhatsApp. So now this is a sent just on WhatsApp. Okay. Why not just save it to our gallery and just check our gallery? It's a gallery, right? You just no, it's not one problem. Yeah. These are sent videos. Are videos generally? That's WhatsApp sent it to. Yeah, those are WhatsApp videos generally. Yes. And media. So but WhatsApp video. So, I don't think it was Zenda. Is it Zenda? No, it should be Zenda. It should have video. Zenda has access to. This is where we're coming from. Yeah, you still be yourself. It's just make it cool for you. 23, third of level. 23. This one. 23, yes, this one. Okay, yes, this one. This one. Just look for the second one first. Put it to slides. Put it on slides. Yes. First, 26 of yes. All right.
This one.
This one. Yeah, sure. I'll just yeah, sure.
Yeah, you get. Yes.
Hello, good morning, everybody. We're supposed to start in 3 minutes time. One is language, literature, and natural culture, part 5, part 4. And this panel will be chaired by China Azar Ukoli. China Azar, yes, right? Yeah. Please, if you are presenting, can you identify? Please, are you sending me a slide? I'm giving you your slide. You're not with slide. Giving yourself. We have everything. So please, we'll begin almost immediately. Once we notice microphone, check the panel check on the line. Okay, fine. Oh, sorry, stop sharing the video. All right. Then turn the camera.
How's your chair?
Good on camera. Hi, Dr. Chinaza. Good morning. Hi, Chinaza.
Hi, good morning.
Good morning.
Yeah, can you hear
See
me?
you.
Yeah, good to see you too.
Yes. So I will be creating this panel with my assistants. The presenters
Okay.
are available around and they submitted their slides. We're supposed to start
Wonderful.
9:15. We just need maybe in 2 minutes. 15 slides that we should coming in, 20 minutes. And once they do that, I'll hand over to you. That's fine.
Okay. Yeah, sure. I mean, I guess you're still gonna be around, right?
Okay. Thank you, Gordon.
Um,
Okay, so we just have a 2 minutes wait.
Okay.
Yeah, so we have more people in the room and I will go.
all right, all right, right.
So we have present here, Chike Lomo Adeyemi from Adeyemi. She's present here. We are still waiting for Kayode Odubono. Then we have
Dumboni.
Odubomi. Then we have Oye Kachi present here, and we have Fan Su. Sorry, Fan. So Fan is present here. So we're only waiting for Kyle. So we only have
All right,
just wait for people to come in and we'll begin.
all right. Thank you.
You're welcome. Okay, so we can begin.
All right. Good morning, everyone. I hope you can all hear me. Welcome to session 8C. This is going to be an interesting panel, and I think the last time that you talked, Sam, Kaide hasn't arrived,
Yes.
has he? Oh, there he is. All right, so we'll have 4 speakers. I think we have in all 1 hour, 30 minutes. And so we're going to have like 15 or 12 minutes each. And we're really going to go in order. So the first speaker here Just one moment. Is Kikelamo Adeni from Lagos State University of Education, and she'll be speaking on the topic when Queen's English is not acceptable, an ethno-linguistic analysis of the use of selected Nigerian English lexical forms. And if Adeni is ready, yes, I think she can go.
Okay.
Okay.
One now. This.
Yes, I'm looking.
The word of
What's that? Yeah, I saw. Yeah.
Yeah, morning on. Morning. Yeah, I need to give the background to this research. It's essentially a work in progress. I've taught English language for a number of years. I've made some observations over the years that there's a little bit of difference between what I teach in theory and what happens with spoken English in informal situations. Then I also realized that there's a friend of mine that had some skills to also manifest such differences. So that got me interested. Excuse me, because there's some videos in Australia. That got me interested in learning more about that. So I realized that there's a little bit of difference between what happens in theory, what happens in informal situation where we have to use the English language. So there's some skits. I want us to just start by looking at those skits. So let's look at that.
I think we've lost audio in the Zoom room.
In that context, you have a young man that has just been brought home to propose, to that wants to get married to another lady. Okay, and not let's sit second for that and explain the two together. Okay, so there are some skits, between two skits now. The first one paints a scenario where a young man comes in to get married to a young lady. So what he did was to try and correct the choice of lexical items by the father-in-law to be. The father-in-law was using Nigerianized forms. For example, he said, what is it called now? He said the lady was asking if the lady had been disvirgined. But the man said, no, it's not disvirgined, it's flower. It's the flower. Okay, and he said another one. When are you going to what's it called now? When are you going to pay the dowry? Like, no, it's not dowry. It's right price. The man calls and said, what's wrong? Then he said, okay, no, don't worry. The third one now went ahead to say, okay, now the fact that two of them can become couples, said no, you cannot call the two of them couples. They make a couple. So the man became mad. He said, what's your problem? I hope you have sisters. He said, yes, I have two. He said, go and marry one of them. You can't marry my daughter. So I'm saying that, and I realized that there are some contexts where we know the Queen's English. Somebody said I should have said King's English now, since we have a king. But let's still talk about. So when I'm talking about Queen's English, I'm talking about the standard British English. So we're seeing that in some context, we use the Nigerianized form of English. So I'll just go through the introductory aspects now. So English is a West Germanic, it belongs to the West Germanic group of languages, and it's evolved to different countries. For example, to the US, UK, Canada as the first language, Nigeria, Ghana as the second language. It has become a world language. So we have different Englishes. And people are even saying that Britain can no longer lay claim to English language. In Nigeria, English performs so many functions. The language of trade, it's the language, the lingua franca, the official language, that's the language of bureaucracy, and the language of education, essentially the language of education. Although the National Policy on Education says that children should be taught the language of the immediate environment at nursery level and from basic 1 to 3. But realize that in real practice, most Nigerians would rather want their children to attend schools where they're being taught in the English language. So the question is, what's Nigerian English? Someone said the fact that English came from Britain and has been brought down to Nigeria, it has been, what's it called now? It's because of some ethno-linguistic factors. What happened is that it has been slashed, it has been transformed, it has been made to perform tasks that it never did in Britain, because we must use English to convey our own socio-linguistic beliefs. So when we're talking about Nigerian English, we're talking about the variety of English. I want to say that the variety of English spoken and used essentially by Nigerians. It's been said that English in Nigeria is being used to project our local customs, our traditions. It has been nativized, it has been acculturated, it has been twisted, it has been bent to serve us in Nigeria. Of course, you must know that language is highly dynamic. When we're talking about users of English in Nigeria, I may want to categorize them in three, when I look at them from three perspectives. We have the basic letter usages, according to Awolusi. Those are the non-standard users of English in Nigeria. For example, when you listen to Nke Akindele, the accented Yoruba usage, when you say, how are you? How's everything? That one is the basic letter form. Then we also have the one that is being used by the middle class people. To a great extent, you realize that the basic letter form is almost always looked down at. Nobody will want to employ such a person to teach English language in Nigeria. Although we use it in Nollywood to create fun, to also depict the educational background of the speaker. On the other hand, we have the other variety, which talks about the form of English being used by what's called middle class users in Nigeria. That is the mesoletter variety. That one, to a great extent, is appreciated by Nigerians because it conveys what's it called, a worldview. Then we also have another usage, which is approletter usage. It's very close to is near native speaker variety, very close to that. So a great extent in Nigeria, that variety is almost always down at. People make fun of people that want to pretend as if they're Britons. I have a colleague of mine that when he's trying to speak, most people find it difficult to understand him. So I told him one day, I said, please, when you want to talk, you open your mouth so that people understand you. So what I did was to use sociolinguistic theory of language variation to analyze some lexical items. I identified 10 of them precisely. For example, the word offhead is used by Nigerians. But in British, we are talking about offhand. But when we're talking about offhead, you're talking about something you can say, maybe without looking at a book. Okay, you have another word, the word drop. You want to come down from a bird, you say, I want to drop. But British, you say, I want to alight. But if you say that in Lagos, you tell the conductor, I want to alight, you say, what bus stop is alight? I don't know that bus stop. I want to draw. So it's drop that is alight. These people that speak English, you people have problems. In Nigeria, we would rather say get man than the British English usage gatekeeper. Another word is long leg. We are talking about long leg in Nigeria. We're talking about using undue influence. So in general, we are able to identify some of these lexical usages and realize that in some contexts, we must use the nativized version. And I've thought about it that just as in 2020, Oxford Dictionary was able to absorb 29 Nigerian lexical items. So what we want to try and do is to develop our usages, standardize them, so that we can accept them in our day-to-day conversation. Thank you.
Wow, thank you so much, Kikeloma Deni. Our next speaker is Kayode Udumbani from Ohio State University.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you all for coming to this panel. My name is Kayode, as I've been introduced. I'm a doctoral candidate at the Ohio State University. And I want to preface this presentation by saying that this is what I'm going to be reading is me trying to begin to think through one of the chapters of my ongoing dissertation. The dissertation broadly looks at the history of political solidarities between Africans and African Americans since the mid-20th century. So in this presentation, I'm thinking through neoliberalism and how that complicates the potential for global Black solidarities. And I'll be doing a brief reading of Americana. Since the mid-2000s, one of the most contentious subjects in African cultural studies has unarguably been Afropolitanism. And while the term Afropolitanism seems to have taken the back burner in scholarly debates recently around how to contemplate the migration of African bodies and cultures, both within the continent and outside of it. The figure of the Afropolitan remains relevant in understanding salient issues about the relationship between Africa and its many diasporas. In spite of scholarly contestations about who exactly qualifies as an Afropolitan, the image of the Afropolitan that has remained persistent in scholarly imaginary is that of the privileged, upwardly mobile, hipster, globetrotting African for whom the world is borderless. That image, of course, is the one that is painted in Taye Selassie's 2005 essay, Bye Bye Baba, or What is an Afropolitan? Either for good or for bad. Selassie's essay has become an unavoidable interlocutor whenever the subject of Afropolitanism is being discussed. Understandably, because it is the first attempt, even if intellectually inchoate, to articulate an identity out of the phenomenon that is now popularly called Afropolitanism. Because of that, I go back to this short essay to unpack a crucial defining marker that Selassie employs in our construction of the Afropolitan identity. Amongst a litany of defining attributes that Selassie ascribes to the Afropolitan, she notes prominently that the Afropolitan has a unique relationship to nation, race, and culture. In Selassie's words, and I'm quoting her now, ultimately, the Afropolitan must form an identity along at least three dimensions: national, racial, cultural, with subtle tensions in between. While our parents can claim one country as home, we must define our relationship to the places we live. How British or American we are or act is in part a matter of affect, often unconsciously and over time. We choose which bits of a national identity we internalize as central to our personalities. So too, the way we see our race, whether Black or biracial or none of the above, is a question of politics rather than pigment. Not all of us claim to be Black. Often this relates to the way we were raised, whether proximate to other brown people or removed. Finally, how we conceive of race will accord with where we locate ourselves in the history that produced Blackness and the political processes that continue to shape it. End of quote. To follow Selassie's line of thinking here is to accept the idea that the Afropolitan not only belongs to many nations, but they are also able to claim whether they are Black or not. Now, this is a very radical way of thinking about race. This Afropolitan impulse to cherry-pick identity markers around nationality, race, and culture stems from what I think of as a neoliberal way of viewing the world and the self. And so I'll try to demonstrate in this presentation how this neoliberal Afropolitan ethos complicates the racial relationship between Africans and African Americans in the 21st century, and therefore undermines global Black solidarity. Like I said earlier, through a brief reading of Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie's novel, Americana. What is salient in Selassie's essay is an unequivocal attempt to decenter race as a defining marker of the Afropolitan identity. This is not the only instance where Selassie has espoused this radical way of thinking about race. In our interview with Aaron Bailey, Selassie stresses that a writing of Baiba Baba come from quote unquote a stranded place of describing what she terms an experience of a very particular pain. One of the striking arguments that Selassie makes in this interview revolves around the subject of race, where she's asserting that until she got to high school, quote, a world consisted of white people and Nigerian people. She notes further, quote, I simply didn't think in terms of black and white, Selassie said. While one cannot contest Selassie's upbringing or the social circumstances surrounding it, what comes across clearly from our words is this unambiguous claim towards a lack of racial understanding in her formative years. She describes her upbringing in this way, and I'll read this long quote because it gives a good sense of what she's talking about. She says, I got to high school where I now occupy space with African American people who wanted to know, for reasons I completely understand, as anyone who watching the news from Ferguson can understand, are you for us or against us? That's basically where they are coming from. Are you black? I didn't know. My mother doesn't call herself black. My father has spent his entire life as a sort of conscientious objector to American culture. The extended family members with whom I spend holidays don't use the word at all. It was a sort of triplicate alienation. I was alienated from other brown people by color, by culture, by residence, and by language. So that's in response to end of quote. Sorry. So that's in response to our African American high school interlocutors. The question they ask her, "Are you black?" is revealing. The fact that she says, "I don't know," is revealing in many ways. This response, "I don't know," betrays a deep-seated and an underlying ontological approach towards race that inherently denies racial affinities and forecloses the possibilities of solidarities. As Selassie claims toward the end of our interview with Aaron Bailey, she doesn't use the word black people because the idea of black people was created to support the hierarchy that is racism. Those are Selassie's words. This unequivocal stance to the center race is foundational to the Afropolitan ethos of identity formation. Afropolitanism essentially seeks to push back against stock significations of Africa and Africanness. And in a bid to do that, there is a clear underlying attempt to distance the identity label from all the quote-unquote wretchedness that Blackness has come to symbolize in global geopolitics, but especially in the global North, where whiteness is property in many ways. In an interview with Sarah Balakrishnan, Achille Mbembe notes that one of the fundamental distinctions between Pan-Africanism and Afropolitanism is that Pan-Africanism, to a large extent, is a racial ideology. Afropolitanism, on the other hand, is not, insofar as it takes into account the fact that to say Africa does not necessarily mean to say black. Chimamanda Adichie's novel Americana is a quintessential Afropolitan novel in many ways, and it is replete with numerous instances of this ideological position on asserting African subjectivity outside of the racial lens of blackness. For example, Auntie Uju reminds her son, DK, constantly that he is African and not black, which is very similar to what Selassie is describing in her interview, that she grew up not thinking in black or white. In the college where Ifemelu goes to school, there's an organization for African students and a separate organization for Black students, by which, in which case Black simply implies African American students. So that distinction between the African and the African American is going on in that space, that college space. The implication of this is that there is a perpetual tension between the African characters and the African American characters that we encounter in the novel anytime the subject of race comes up. The title of Ifemelu's blog race themes or various observations about American Blacks, in parentheses, those formerly known as Negroes, by a non-American Black, in itself reveals a certain anxiety that Ifemelu feels to distance our experiences as an African immigrant in the United States from the experiences of African Americans. While hanging out with a group of friends that Ifemelu has made through our African American boyfriend Blaine, our positionality gets questioned by Shan, who is Blaine's elder sister. And Shan says, you know why Ifemelu can write that blog, by the way? Because she's African. She's writing from the outside. She doesn't really feel all the stuff that she's writing about. It's all quaint and curious to her. So she can write it and get all these accolades and get invited to talks. If she were African American, she'd just be labeled angry and shunned. Because of the way Ifemelu positions herself in the narrative and the way she positions her ontological voice, African Americans do not really consider her as an ally. And her actions definitely reinforce that suspicion that she's constantly placed under by her African American friends and acquaintances. There's a moment where Blaine organizes a protest at Yale University to address a race-based discrimination that a Black worker had experienced. Blaine had expected Ifemelu's full support, of course. However, instead of attending this protest in solidarity, Ifemelu chooses to have lunch with a Senegalese friend that she had just met, Boubacar. Blaine, of course, is deeply hurt by this and he blots out at Ifemelu. You know, it's not just about writing a blog. You have to live like you believe it. That blog is a game that you don't really take seriously. And the narrator goes on to know that Ifemelu could recognize a subtle accusation in Blaine's tone about a lack of zeal and conviction, and also about her Africanness. She was not sufficiently furious because she was African, not African American. What all of these textual examples demonstrate is that the Afropolitan neoliberal ethos of de-emphasizing race continues to undermine the potential for racial solidarity between Africans and African Americans. The ontological paradox that Afropolitanism and indeed Afropolitans have to contend with, therefore, is this. How do you articulate a non-racial politics of identity within a global structure of power that is constructed on racialization and still very much interprets Blackness from the standpoint of phenotype? The more Afropolitans distance themselves from race, the more racial solidarity becomes impossible among Black people, and the more global white supremacy continues to entrench its divide and conquer strategy of the racial exploitation of Blackness. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much, Kayode Odumboni from The Ohio State University. I neglected to add the earlier on. Our next speaker is Onyekachi Obayi, and he'll be speaking on epistemic politics and pluriversality in Olarotimi's Our Husband Has Gone Mad Again, and Emeka Nwabueze's A Parliament of Vultures.
Good morning, everyone. I am Onyekachi Obayi from the University of Michigan. And I'll be presenting on epistemic politics and universality in two Nigerian plays. Basically, Emeka Nwabueze's Parliament of Vulture and Arutin's Our Husbands Have Gone Mad Again. So the focus of this paper is about an emerging global society called the pluriverse. So, and I read, the pluriverse, according to Ulrich Ostlander, that the pluriverse is born out of a decolonial desire to break those bonds of dominance and the call for a coexistence of many worlds as an acknowledgement of entanglement of diverse cosmologies, of which Western universalism is but one. Western universalism is but one of them. So the pluribus emerged as a result of this friction between the Eurocentric worldview and then the Afrocentric worldview. So there is a friction between these two worldviews. And then the solution to this friction is the emergence of the pluribus. Now, I mentioned epistemic politics in the first place. So the idea of epistemic politics goes back to Walter Mignolo's concept, the geopolitics of knowledge, where Mignolo will always mention about the global South nations and then the global world and region, that there is this dearth of knowledge from the global South, so that the Eurocentric worldview tends to undermine everything that is coming from the global South region of the world. So the pluribus is the solution to this unending argument. And then while looking at these two plays, I began with the concept of modernity, coloniality, because according to Walter Mignola, these are the two sides. They are the two sides of a coin, modernity on one side, and then coloniality on the other side. So modernity is the hidden side and the darker side of Western modernity, coloniality itself, the hidden and the darker side of Western modernity. So on one part, the narrative of progress, the narrative of salvation, this is what Western modernity tends to sell. But actually, on a 360-degree view, you would see that on the other side of the divide, there is the coloniality. And then this coloniality gives rise to a particular phenomenon called metaphysical catastrophe. Metaphysical catastrophe is the normalization of things and events that happen in a war situation. So if you go to the global South nations, you will discover that the reality in this part of the world is as though there is an ongoing war. There is no difference between everyday reality in the global South and the situation of war. There's no difference. There's no difference. So that what you tend to see in the global South, everyday reality is just tantamount to a war situation. So it is called metaphysical catastrophe. And how does metaphysical catastrophe permeate itself in the everyday reality of the global South and region? It occurs because there are basically three pillars of everything coloniality, three major pillars: the coloniality of power, the coloniality of knowledge, and the coloniality of being. These three pillars are the pillars of coloniality. And then how coloniality operates is by initiating a transformation in these three pillars. So the first one is the coloniality of knowledge. The coloniality of knowledge is the geopolitics of knowledge, where you discover that you find characters who derive joy in denying everything, every knowledge that will come from the global South, and then amplifying knowledge that is coming from the global North. So they tend to think that everything coming from Africa or any global South region is not relevant. So they tend to amplify everything that is Western in this context. That is the coloniality of knowledge. So they don't afford people the liberty to think independently. You are limited to a certain scope. You are not allowed to think independently. This is the problem of coloniality of knowledge. Now, what happens is that when you are not allowed to think independently, power has been seized from you. So there are two major dichotomies here. You will see there are two major dichotomies in coloniality of power, because from coloniality of knowledge, you move on to coloniality of power. So when you are not allowed to think independently, then what happens is that you have been shifted in the zones of non-being, what Franz Fanon calls the dam. So you are shifted in the zone of non-being. So when you are shifted in the zone of non-being, that power has been taken away from you. Because remember, those who control knowledge exist in the zones of being. And then those who are conditioned to think in a particular way exist in the zone of non-being. Now, what happens, that's the final stage now, is the transition from coloniality of being to colonial, the transition from coloniality of power to coloniality of being. So remember, I began with knowledge, and then it transited to power. And then the final level is the coloniality of being. So when you find a character, when you find someone who have been conditioned not to think independently, and then the power have been taken away from that person, what you discover is that at the end of the day, that person becomes a being who there is this pattern from this person. I think, therefore I am. But there is a way that these decolonial philosophers reconstructed this maxim, and then said, I think I am, therefore others are not, something like that. So what happens is that you are now conditioned in the zones of non-being, and then therefore for that reason, you are no longer existing. So anything can happen, and you can't talk, you can't do anything, because the power of independent thinking has been seized from you. So that if we begin to look into the realities in the global south, you will discover that the problem that the global south is currently undergoing is not necessarily as a result of economic issues or anything. It's as a result of this power of independent thinking that have been severed from those people. So now, this is the goal of decoloniality. Decoloniality now comes to unveil, first of all, because I told us that there are two major sides to everything. One side is coloniality, and then the other side is modernity. Okay. Okay. So the end point is that to bring liberty to the global south, to end metaphysical catastrophe, that same transformation that happened to knowledge, that happened to power, and then happened to being, that orchestrated metaphysical catastrophe, that same mechanism has to happen again to liberate these people and then transit them into the pluriverse. Now, to decolonize knowledge, to decolonize power, and then to decolonize being. First of all, it begins with epistemic disobedience. Epistemic disobedience. Epistemic disobedience is, a point where you come to disagree with what is given to you. A point where you come to, a level where you come that you can think independently of what is presented. And then another one is broader thinking. You think beyond the conventional, system. So, and then you believe entirely from the colonial matrix of power, the way you have been conditioned to think and live, and that you believe entirely from it. So this transformation is what actually occurs, that to transit one into the pluriverse. So the pluriverse is an emerging global society where no system of knowledge overrides another. So in these two places, I engaged in our husband has gone mad again. I engaged Major Lejoka Brown, a military personnel who translated from military into politics. And then the discovery at the end of the day was that the major way to dislodge this is independent thinking. The ability to think independently and outside of the box. That is where freedom begins.
All right. Thank you very much, Onyekachi. Our very last speaker will be Fan Zuyon from Peking University, and she'll be speaking on gender identity and city space in 3 novels by Nigerian female authors.
Good morning. My name is Fan Zuyon, and my Yoruba name is Funke. I'm from Peking University, and thanks for the introduction. I'm going to deal with the dimension of gender identity and city space in 3 acclaimed novels by Nigerian female authors. This novels, I think, present the woman's encounters with the city space in Lagos in a gender-aware way. So let me first introduce my personal feelings about Lagos. It's my first visit here, and many people here may a little louder.
Yes.
And sorry here. And many people here may ask me about what is your feeling? What do you feel about Lagos? And I find this question really hard to answer because I don't think I can simply define Lagos in one or two sentences. I think this city can be very international, can be very modern, but it can be also local and traditional. And also I met different kinds of people here who are living different kinds of way of life. So what I'm trying to say is that I think Lagos is a place that is multi-layered. I think they have various aspects that deny simplification and generalization. So what I'm going to do is trying to figure out how Nigerian female authors may represent the multi-dimensions of Lagos life through the literature and explore the constitution of literary space and its entanglement with the dimension of gender. So I choose these three novels, that is Buchi Emecheta's The Joys of Motherhood and Chimamanda Adichie's Coffee's A Yellow Song and Nnedi Okorafor's Lagoon, respectively published in 1977, 2006, and 2015. They are set in different historical moments of modern-day Nigeria. The Joy of Motherhood in the colonial Lagos, and Half of a Yellow Song during the Civil War, and Lagoon in the future Lagos with the imagined invasion of aliens. So I choose these three novels not only because they all have scenes that taken place in Lagos, but also they have outstanding characters who facing gender troubles that make themselves identity at stake. And also, I think by putting them together, by reading them together, these novels can form an imagined picture of the past, present, and future of Lagos. So, okay, I understand. Thank you. And thank you. The ecofeminist scholar Marty Kiel has proposed the theory of truncated narrative of a patriarchal society. And by saying truncated narrative, she means that a story that is told in one side that is a single way, so it cannot show a holistic picture of the truth. And she says that men may understand female and nature in a parallel way. So there are two common images of female as well as nature. One is to see woman or nature as beast, as something evil and to be conquered by some kind of heroes. The other is to see women as irrational in different matters. So they are not human beings and just like others. So these stories are told from the perspective of the male, may see those kind of males as the only heroes and to neglect to ignore the story of the females. So I think it can also be true when it is applied to people's imagination of the city. So in the earlier Lagos novels written by, for example, Chinua Achebe in his No Longer at Ease, and simpering advances people of the city, we can really find that they are male stories, and women are either passive or something sort of like the background of stories, or they may portray city women like very Western-like, like evil women or even fallen women. So these male authors, they try to figure out their relationship with the city by imagining the relationships with women in the city. But what about female authors' idea about their lives in the city. I think the involvement of female authors in literary space has added multiple voices to the representation of the city, and they present polyphonic narratives that may include the marginalized that are long ignored. The first book I will introduce is Buchi Emmachetta's Choice of Motherhood. As Buchi is one of the earliest female writers that entered the literary scene in Nigeria. So the Joys of Motherhood is one of the pioneers that tells from a perspective of a female who came from the Igbo village society. And it tells the tragedy of her who called Nuego, who is an exemplary of traditional Igbo culture, born as the chief's daughter, and she's beautiful, good at marketing, and she's married by her father from the village to a man who works as a houseboy for the white masters. And the story is set in 1970s during the British colonization. At the very start of the story, Lagos is depicted as a place built by the British for the British. It is differentiated and administered just by the colonizers. But the natives here was in an unfavorable position. They do not have equal access to the powers in the cities. And for women here, I think this thing is much more serious, much more heavier. We can find that the protagonists feel a sense of displacement in the colonial city at where she's living at. For example, the place she lives in the courtyard of the British is called the boys' quarter, which suggested not only the unequal power between the colonizers and the natives, but also the ignorance to the needs of native female here. So females are supposed to be invisible. They're not supposed to be here. And the protagonist is not allowed to decorate the room, not allowed to cry aloud when she loses her first child, because she's living in a place that excluded her. So this novel really shows that the native woman's right to the city was overlooked by colonial urban planners. And what is worse in this story is that her gift of marketing clashes with the separate division of public and private spheres in the city. And Ifi Amadume wrote that in a male daughter's female husbands that traditionally West African women control the market and cash, so they really have access to the power of the traditional society. But in the space of the cities, they changes the gender division of labor. Her husband works as a houseboy in the domestic sphere, but what her wife, the protagonist Nuego, do is much more invisible than her husband does. Her work as a housewife to do cookings, to do washings, and to take care of children, that is non-paid and also precarious and insecure. So we can find that the deprivation of her from making money make her more dependent on her husband's wage. So here we can find the so-called a process of modernization and capitalized development have only deprived women workers of their traditional rights, but they did not give their access to enter the right of the city as a citizen. And in this novel, Lagos is put in the international geographies. It is a manifestation of the imperialist geography of colonization and globalization. It reveals an unequal power embedded in this global environment. This novel also captures the shift of a historical time, like during the Second World War, the protagonist's husband was brought to India by the British Army, and after the decolonization of Nigeria, the sons of the protagonist all immigrated to America and Canada without staying around her to take care of her. So we can tell that Lagos is a place in this novel to be exploited by some imperialist space. And we'll move to the next story, that is Amacheta's Heart of Yellow Sun. It deals with the violence during the Nigerian Civil War. So unlike any other war novels, it shows how the Civil War impacts private life of individuals, private life of many females. The story is told from three perspectives, including an evil female intellectual who is called Alana, and a British journalist, and a houseboy called Ugu. So the story actually includes people of different age class, and they include them into the knowledge production of this world. And born as a daughter of a wealthy and influential chief, so Olena was born and raised in Lagos, but however, she feels alienated with her home in Lagos. For her, Lagos is a place full of corruption, of sex bribe, and a city where the rules are not transparent, so the social elites may master the rules. And her parents may want her to sexually bribe a man to make a business deal. So this also still make her bodies to be commodified. So Olena may be seen as a stranger in her own place and feel displaced in her own hometown. And it reveals that women may have this sense of dislocation in her own hometown because of the heritage of the colonization. And in the end of the novel, after the war, Olena faces the violence of female body during the wars, and at the end of the story, she managed to reestablish her identity, shattered by her boyfriend's relationship with another rural girl and about her trauma during the war, her inability to marriage. She integrated her experience and trauma by tell her stories to the houseboy Ugu, and who written it down. So the work is actually the outcome of the collaboration between a female intellectual and a lower class boys, which shows the oral traditions of storytelling of Western Africans. So in this story, we can see the power of narrative, the power of stories. It can be act as therapies, as medicines for people and women to establish themselves and narratives. And I'll quickly move to the last novel, that is Lagoon. It is a science fiction by Nedi Okurova. And Lagoon imagines a national crisis faced by Lagosians during alien invasions. And the aliens are imagined as a national crisis, and they are the formidable creatures with more advanced technologies than human beings. And it has three protagonists in this novel, but the story is told more than these three perspectives. It includes different people's reaction to the crisis. For example, from the Christian bishop, the military force, the popular artists, and also scientists. It also includes some social minorities like prostitute, like a sexual minority group, and also children chiefs. Sometimes it may write the things like testimonies of the alien invasion from the view of animals like swordfish and spiders. They are wandering in the city. So by trying to narrative the story in this way, Okurova tries to show the holistic picture of to show the multi-dimension of Lagos, and it also gives a different kind of animals and different kinds of people the way to enter Lagos, the access to enter Lagos. And in this story, we find that Lagos is seen as a place that is ready for change, and it can also survive for during its constant evolving. It can survive by the coexistence of the past of the future and the myth and science, tradition, and modernity. So Lagos can be imagined and reconstructed by the female also to be a place that is set for the future. So these stories imagine how Lagos is going to be, and is set beyond an international geography. It is become the center of interplanetary interactions. And I will quickly wrap up what I want to say here. First, I think that the female identities represented in this novel are very unstable, ambiguous, and flowing. It is multiple, and it is a state of becoming rather than a state of being. We can feel its porous boundaries between the female identity and the surroundings of them, the city space, and the interpersonal relationship around them. And after that, in these novels, we can feel the productivity of literary space and its entanglement with the historical changes of Lagos as an urban entity. So by putting these novels together, we can find that Lagos is transformed from a place of exclusiveness during the colonial periods to a place of productive hybridity and diversity. And these novels by the female authors, they contribute to disrupt hegemonic narratives and to show that their rejection of generalization. Thank you.
All right. Thank you so much. Sam, can you share the screen? Yes. All right. So thank you all so much. We are so grateful to Kikelemo Adeni, Kayode Odumboni, Onyekachi Obayi, and Fan Zian for your presentations. These were wonderful papers. We have some time now for questions. I already have some here from Professor Adeleke Adeko, and I'll read them out. The first one here is for Kayode Odumboni from Professor Adeko. Is it plausible that globalism, which is also the era of Afropolitanism, discourages solidarities across those that affirm globalist ethos? I'll just go over that one more time. Is it plausible that globalism, which is also the era of Afropolitanism, discourages solidarities other than those that affirm globalist ethos? And it continues, would Afropolitanisms, in quote now, I don't know, be amenable to labor union solidarity? And finally, would Afropolitanism be open to the goals of NSARS or Rhodes Must Fall? I also have one for Obayi, again from Professor Adeko, and it says, would you please say a little more about how thinking independently would work or not work in Rotimi's play? Would you say a little bit more about that? And of course, the idea is what it means to think independently, how that can work or not work in Rotimi's plays.
Okay. I'll keep responding to that, but now apart from this, shall we represent the solution? So, however, before Lisa begins to think, Sikira already had some questions on her lips. Sikira, that's one of the wives of Lejoka Brown. Sikira already has some questions on her lips, as confessions of Lejoka Brown fails to coincide with his actions. Sikira's consciousness is awakened to uncharted realities. Those burdens her to ask some questions pertaining the real motive of the power-hungry political aspirant, that is, Lejoka Brown. Her consciousness is aroused by the pain she suffers in the zone of non-being. This is because Lejoka Brown promises salvation to all and sundry, and yet she still remains a victim of his domestic violence. It leads her to suspect the possibility of a hidden agenda. Now, reading an excerpt from the text, Sikira speaking now, in this house, her, a slave, that's what I am. Did he marry me because he loves me or because of his crazy politics? What do I care whether he wins politics or not? So the major answer to that question is that the ability to think, suffering have something it can do to an individual. Pain itself it awakens curiosity in a way. So you see that in this text, Sikira is one of the wives of Major Lejoka Brown. And then Lejoka Brown marries her because of his political ambition, not necessarily because of love or anything. So her ability to think independently came as a result of suffering. She suffered to an extent that she began to think on the motive of why, because Lejoka Brown, the situation here now is that Lejoka Brown operates with the coloniality of knowledge. He didn't want the woman to understand his real motive of coming to her. His motive actually is politics, but he displayed it as love. So politics, displaying it as love, captures the rhetoric of modernity. But the real picture, which is coloniality, is that he's marrying her to exploit her, to use her to gain his political audience. Because having seen that the mother is the leader of the market women, so Lejoka Brown is looking for influence, for someone with influence. So he gets this woman as a wife and then marries her. But the problem here is that he didn't love the woman and then he subjected her to domestic violence, suffering, and all sorts of things. So this suffering that she undergoes now causes her to think. And then in the process of thinking, Lisa also comes in and then she gains some sort of enlightenment. And then she comes to understand that this man does not love her at all. Rather, politics is what he is there for. So the response to that question is that thinking independently is as a result of pain, causing someone to challenge realities and then probe them more, and then to see things the way they are and then react to them. I don't know whether I've answered that question.
All right, thank you. Okay, do you have some thoughts?
Okay, so this is a question from my advisor, and I can indicate this when you get a question from the advisor. Sit down and I'm still trying to process the questions, but I'll try to fumble my way through. With regard to the second part of the question, that would Afropolitanisms, I don't know, be amenable to labor union solidarity? Would Afropolitanism be open to the goals of NSAS? I think yes, and I think it's a question of individual subjectivity. And I'm thinking in particular about Opal Tometi, who is one of the founders of the Black Lives Matter movement, but who was at the forefront of connecting the Black Lives Matter movement to the NSAS movement. Now, she is an American, but born to Nigerian immigrant parents in the US. And so on the one hand, whereas Afropolitans like Selassie tries to distance themselves from race and racial issues, Opal Tometi, by definition, right, is an Afropolitan because she can lay claim to multiple nations, but she's still very intentional about thinking of how white supremacy operates both in the global north and in the global south, and to look at the global connections that are there. So I think, yes, it is possible for Afropolitanism to be open to the goals of movements like NSAS and Rhodes Must Fall. But I think at the end of the day, it goes back to the subjective individual and how they are thinking about their position as part of that movement and as part of the world in general. But of course, these are questions I have to continue to think about and grapple with.
All right. Yeah, I see some hands up in the audience.
Thank you. Well, thank you to all the four panelists. Those quite fascinating and thoughtful presentations. I have questions for, virtually for 40 presenters, but to accommodate others, I'll limit myself to just two. And of those two, I will make one a comment and then the other a question. Okay, and Coyote, to you first. I appreciate your conclusion that there's a sense in which neoliberalism undermines, race. And that's quite powerful for me because that's about the case, which many people don't think about. I'd like you to speak more to whether, the neoliberal consciousness also allows for thinking of places like the US, Canada, and other, Western emporiums, as post-racial societies, in that sense. So that's the question I have for you, Kay. And whether in your own reading of Adichie's novel, there's a manifestation, of such consciousness, and whether you're also going to be incorporating that in your chapter, as you, work on it. Yeah, so the other question that I have is for, what's the name again here? It's for Emeka. Quite a lot of conceptual, things going around in your work. But here is what I am quite struck by in your work. You talk about metaphysical catastrophe, and then you use these two terms repeatedly, global north, global south. I think in the sense in which these two concepts are being thrown about, they blur and mask more than clarify. For example, when you said metaphysical catastrophe is the condition of countries within the global south, I would think that on the surface, anyone would say that's true. But if you pay attention more closely, these countries that have been so grouped together do not exhibit similar conditions. And I do think that when we speak about the global south, we have to speak qualitatively in a sense in which we make distinctions. Again, to limit it just on the African continent alone, there are countries that are doing quite very well. The human conditions there are relatively, okay. You can't lump, for example, Botswana with Nigeria. Which is increasingly regressing in the sense in which Botswana is not. So I do think that we need to demonstrate that carefulness when we speak, to this kind of context. And Chair, I'm sorry I said two, but let me just close with this. And this will be for, fun. I like what you do, but I quickly want you to reflect on the three novels that you're studying are published at different points in time. One in 1977, 2008, and 2015. In your reading of this, your comparative reading of this text, what similarities and dissimilarities have you found in the subjects, that they engage, particularly the, setting, the physical setting of Lagos? So how do they, portray differences of the same space, and of course similarities? And you may not answer that. It might be something that you might think of while you're doing your work. I appreciate your audience. Yeah.
Thank you. I have a comment. My name is Destiny. I have a comment for Oyekachi. So I want to understand your framing of the concept coloniality. Does it, how did you frame it alongside empire,
Western colonialism and all. And then my comments about the major character in Olarotimi's Our Husband Has Gone Mad Again, makes me more of confused because you associate him with coloniality. For me, I think Lejoka Brown is more of a victim of what the post-colonialists may call hybridity, that loss of neither here or that Eurocentrism, where he privileges whatever that is associated with Europeans or whites. But you associate him here as colonial. In what sense are you associating? And in fact, what is your framing, your conceptual framing of coloniality? Yes. Okay.
Yeah, thank you so much, this fella, for that question. And I completely agree with you that there's a way in which neoliberalism fits into this ideology of the post-racial that we are now. I think a lot of people, since the election of Obama, like there's this way in which people began to think about, oh, race no longer matters in the way it used to. It's a new dispensation. Blackness is no longer synonymous to like backwardness, wretchedness, and all those things. And back to Dr. Adeko's question about globalism, I think it's one of the fallouts of globalization and how individuals can now progress within this chain and system of resources, right? Regardless of their racial identities. But I think, and this is what I believe, that global white supremacy is still a thing. And its impact might now be more subtle than they used to be, but it definitely still is. It definitely is still there. That in a lot of ways, whiteness equates property in ways that blackness does not. And the way I think about it is, yes, there's an Obama, but Obama is an outlier, right? It's a function of tokenism. Like Obama doesn't represent every black people, nor does he represent the potential of blackness, right, all over the world. So I think it's a conflation of what is going on with globalization and how individuals are able to negotiate global systems to attain resources, but there is still race, right? This king, like I said, towards the conclusion, blackness is still very much tied to phenotype, and our bodies continue to constantly signify meanings to people, even before they encounter us. And so that's that way of being in the world, where once you appear, there's a signification that happens to whoever sees you, regardless of who you are, where you're coming from, or your social status in society, still has to be considered. So the idea of post-racial, I think, is I don't believe that we live in a world where race no longer matters, especially.
Your first question.
Yes. Oh yeah.
Your first question, my own conception of coloniality. Okay. When I began, I said that coloniality is actually, I think what I'm going to call it colonial matrix of power. Colonial matrix of power. Matrix of power. So it's a power structure. It's sort of, because, okay, now let me make a sharp distinction between coloniality and colonialism. Colonialism refers to the historical colonialism, historical period when Europeans were here presently, really over the African region. And then Coloniality, on the other side, is different in the sense that it is the system of power that it's still remaining in this colonized nation, even after the historical colonialism. It is a power structure on its own. And this power structure, it is a sort of a mindset, a way of thinking that our leaders have inherited from historical colonialism. So in this context, Lejuka Brown fits into a figure of coloniality because he functions with the same system that is a sort of an inheritance from the West. Now, what is this system? In the text, you see the surprise and attack strategy that he brought out as a political campaign, means. So surprise and attack. Now, in my reading, I saw that in from the way because he was insisting on using that surprise and attack as a means of campaign. I read it in a particular way that implicates him as a figure of coloniality. Surprise implicates modernity, the rhetoric of modernity. That's the part of development that they show the people. So what politicians do here in Africa, during elections, they will show you things that will attract you. But meanwhile, there is an inner intention that will not be shown. So surprise becomes a metaphor that stands in for the rhetoric of modernity. Then attack is coloniality, where the person begins to show you you begin to see the real content and the real intention. So, but there are differences in this, that surprise precedes attack. The rhetoric of modernity precedes coloniality. So the person will show all the narrative of development, all the narrative of salvation and everything that he will do when he eventually gets into power. But getting into power, you begin to see the angle of that's the darker side. You begin to see extermination, you begin to see things happening. So in this text, you see, in fact, Lejuka Brown he was impatient. Like he didn't even wait to win the power before doing this. So you see some media personalities coming to his house to come and interview him. And then suddenly he picks up a gun and then gets them, lying on the floor. So these attitudes implicates him as a figure of coloniality. So coloniality doesn't necessarily look at someone who is, white or something. It looks at someone embodying that mentality. We are looking at a power structure, and this power structure is the way someone thinks. So that is the angle.
All right. Can you all hear me?
So
Yes.
Doc said something, and I think
Yeah.
you should. He said something, and I think you should. Okay. So
We have power
outage.
There's one more.
Okay.
Okay.
But again, we should be rounding off, I think.
Yeah, Naz, we
Okay.
are out of power, so the camera is
Okay.
not working. But fan
All
wants to,
right.
but you can. Oh, okay.
I would like to
Okay.
the question about why I put this three novels together. What are
Just
the
basically what you have found out to be similarities and differences in the sense in which they treat, the setting of data.
Because in terms of narrative, so I think the choice of motherhood is that this to put a female perspective, one of the first to put female perspective about this idea of something like nation, about Lagos, about the city. Usually, what she write about is about inside the domestic space. So people may, before people may think it's tedious, it's travel, it is not as important as what is like some other male writers write about, for example, about the nation formation or about the conflicts. But by adding this female perspective, she shows that, she proves that a female author can also deal with something important happened in the public space by revealing things happened in private spheres. And in terms of narrative, I think the Hub of Yellow Sun at three perspectives. It is interwoven. It involves a female intellectual, a boy, and a white journalist. So it's not only from the point of view of the elite, but also some point of view from below. So they have this mixture of perspectives. And for Lagoon, it has its chapters told in a different perspective. So I think we can find the difference in the way of the narrative. And also, they share the similarity of having a main female character who having trouble being a mother, who is struggling with their motherhood between the traditional roles and also their roles as a modern woman to work, for example, in the work as a career. And three of these women are all seen as somehow mad or as a witch because of their thought as transgressive act in the society. So we can see the similarity of brilliant woman who is fighting against the prejudice.
Thank you, little.
All right, thank you all so much. I'm sure we are out of time. Again, thank you, Kikelama Adeni, Kaido Imboni, Onyechi Obai, and Fan Z.
Thank you, Dr. Okoli.
Yes.